Hello, this is Francesca Vigliani from Cloud Academy. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. Today, we'll go over hands-on labs, out-of-the-box and custom engagement solutions to empower your employees with practical skills. I'd like to introduce you to our CTO, Giacomo Marinangeli, and our lead content developer of labs, Logan Rakai. In this session, they will reveal the functionality and flexibility within our hands-on labs. Before I hand it over to them, I'd like to remind you that you can add any question in the chat box. We'll have a quick Q&A at the end of the webinar. Thank you for joining us today, and over to you guys.
Thank you, Francesca. My name is Giacomo Marinangeli. I'm one of the founder and the CTO of Cloud Academy. I used to be a software developer, and I also wrote the first line of code of Cloud Academy. I'm now also leading the hands-on labs product as product owner. And thank you for everybody for being with us today. Logan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. And thank you to all our attendees for joining us. I'm Logan, and as Francesca said, I lead the content for labs here at Cloud Academy. And I'm delighted to be able to talk with you about our lab technology and content here at Cloud Academy today.
Thank you, Logan. Now, before we begin with a very nice demo that Logan is gonna help us go through, let me show you a very few slides about the hands-on labs. Before we start, I'd like to give everybody an overview of what are our labs and how they work. So let me start with a quick overview of the labs architecture. So our labs are composed of several layers of technologies, and the first one I want to mention is that every laboratory comes with a real vendor environment. Students can work on a dedicated environment with no simulation involved. The same environment and the same products and services and features that you can find online is also available with our laboratories for every student. The second component of our architecture are the provisioning templates. This enables easily mocking up a complex scenario that closely matches a real-world problem. A vital advantage of this approach is that there is zero setup time for the student, who can focus 100% of their effort on learning instead of spending hours setting up an environment. Another component of our labs is the security agent that is available for every session that the student have and run on our labs. This is a real-time agent with a persistent and ongoing scan. It protects the environment and helps the student remain focused on the lab objective. The guided steps is another very important component of our labs. Instructions are already fully customizable, and content creators can use our full library of instruction to help students achieve their objective. Usable steps, of course, that you can pick up from our catalog and create and reuse your company's previously created steps. The last but not least component that I want to mention is that the assessment layer. Students' work is automatically validated in real time at the end of labs and after each step. Our skill assessment algorithm assigns a score to the lab session and updates the user skill profile. Now, before we move on with a quick demo, let me focus on a few features that are available to every student of our cloudacademy.com website. Our hands-on labs work with our real cloud environments, and your team can work directly with vendors that are available for production environments. And let me start with AWS. That is the first vendor that we implemented, but we also have Google Cloud Platform, Microsoft Azure. But you can also find laboratories on Docker, Kubernetes, and data pipelines, and much more. These laboratories are available with guidance or in challenge mode, and each cloud environment, Cloud Academy lab, can take place in a secure sandboxed environment with no additional costs, no accounts, and no test instances to clean up. As you can see from the screen, the user can use the credential that we provide, log in into the vendor's panel, and then is immediately redirected to the vendors portal to start working on the lab's objectives. Another product that we have at Cloud Academy that is part of the hands-on labs family are the labs challenges. After running a verification check on the lab environment, your skill profile will be updated and will reflect your new skills. A lab challenges is very similar to a lab, but is focused on the assessment part of the lab's training. Logan is going to show you how this works in a few minutes. Another feature that we have that we call Labs Resume is able to let students save their progress and go back to the same session after hours after they start, and they can let students working on training scenario much more complicated that can last for days instead of hours, and the students never waste their time doing a lot of hours of training without any pause. Now, Logan, up to you now with a quick demo about our product for the students.
Thanks, Giacomo. So as Giacomo said, I'm going to demo our two main streams of labs, the guided labs first and a lab challenge second. Our user journeys usually begin here in our Cloud Academy library, where you can find all of our content. For this demo, we're going to focus just on labs, so I'll narrow in on Microsoft Azure Labs. You can see the wide variety of content that we have specifically for hands-on labs in Microsoft Azure. First, with a guided lab, let's take a look at this lab, which is about Azure App Service and deploying a web app. Each lab will give you a description that includes what kind of learning objectives you will obtain by completing the lab here in the objective section, and any recommended prerequisites before you start taking a lab. You can also see that we regularly update our content here at Cloud Academy. For a visual of what you start the lab with and what you will complete, what you will build by completing the lab, you can see these environment diagrams near the bottom of the lab. At this point, I'll start the lab, and this will start creating actual environments in Azure, and you'll be provided with credentials to sign into the Azure portal using a real environment, no simulation. So here we are, the lab has started, and we have the credentials provided on the left-hand side. So I'll open the console, which will be the Azure portal, and I'll sign in with the provided credentials, username and password. And as fast as that, I'm now signed in with a real Cloud Academy managed account in Azure. And I can start completing the lab using a real environment by following our guided instructions. You can see a summary of all the steps in this lab on the left-hand side. And I'll quickly summarize how each lab step has an introduction to give you context and explanations for what you're about to complete, as well as instructions for the actual actions that you need to perform to complete the lab step. Instructions will also give you some explanation for why you're doing each instruction so that you can generalize your knowledge to your own specific use cases after completing the lab. So in this lab, there are 9 lab steps, and I'll just quickly jump through the lab steps so that you can see the kind of content that we have. Each lab has that same format with explanations, instructions for the actions that you perform, as well as images to help you successfully complete the lab. Once you do complete the lab, our labs can have validation steps in between lab steps or near the end of the lab. In this case, we have a validation step at the end of the lab, which is where I'm navigating to right now. But as you can see, we do have very in-depth and detailed content to help you successfully complete all of our labs and achieve those learning objectives. So we're almost there now. We have one more step to go before we get to the validation step. Of course, for this demo, I'm simply skipping over all the actions just to get to that validation step so you can see how that looks. So here we are on the validation step. In this case, it's the end of lab validation. But you can see that our validation checks will check the actual environment that the student is performing the lab in. So if I start the checks, because I didn't perform any of the instructions, these checks will fail. And we'll see that shortly. So we can see that we have some failed results coming in, and now all of the checks have failed. So let's see what this looks like if we actually perform one of the lab steps. So for this lab, the student does need to create an app service plan. So if I search for app service plans in the Azure portal, I'll go ahead and start creating an Azure app service plan. Of course, as Giacomo said, we have labs covering a wide variety of content and topics. In this lab in particular, we need to start by creating an app service plan. So I'll call my app service plan, and I'll see which region the lab is in, the West US region, so I'll use that for our region. And we have a standard SKU, that looks good to me, so let's go ahead and create that. And this will kick off the resource provisioning process in Azure. And as Giacomo said before, we're not using any simulation. This is the real Azure portal. And just as in the real world, there is some delay involved when creating resources. So we'll just wait for this to create, and then I will run those validation checks again. And we'll see that that check that looks for the app service plan will pass now that we have created the app service plan. So just bear with me as this creates. So there we have our success message. The resource has been created. So now let's see what happens if we run those checks again. There it is. So the validation check has inspected our actual environment for the lab, and it's detected that we have in fact created an Azure App Service Plan. And that's how we can track that the users are actually following the instructions and performing the instructions, as well as achieving those learning objectives for the lab. I'll submit the lab at this point, knowing that I still have 4 validation checks that aren't complete. So that will impact my skill profile. I won't be getting the maximum benefit by not achieving all of those validation checks. And in this case, I didn't complete enough checks to get an improvement in my skill profile. Had I performed all the lab and completed all the validation checks, I would see an increase in my skill profile. But you can see some of the categories that are measured by the skill profile for this particular lab. Each lab has associated skills, and you can see whether those skills, whether your profile in those skills have increased or decreased based on your performance in the lab. And that's all measured using those validation checks. So I like this lab, I'll give it a thumbs up. And now if I return to our Microsoft Azure Labs, let's take a look at our lab challenges. So we have lab challenges for the different cloud vendors and many different subject areas, including software development, Kubernetes, to name a couple. But for this example, let's look at our Microsoft Azure AZ-103 Azure Administrator Challenge. So when you start the lab, it looks very similar to a regular guided lab, but we will tell you that this is a challenge and that you don't have full and guided instructions when you complete this lab. For lab challenges, it's really about the user proving their skills, and they'll get a significant improvement in their skill profile if they can complete the challenge. So let's go ahead and start this lab. And the process is very similar. Just like with a guided lab, any resources that are being declared in the provisioning template are created once you start the lab. And you'll be provided with a real account in the cloud vendor's own management system. So this is an Azure challenge. So again, we have Azure portal credentials on the left, but you'll notice that there's only one lab step. For lab challenges, we provide you with a mission, a minimal set of instructions just to get started, and then we explain the different challenges that you need to complete. And then immediately you're presented with the validation checks. So for lab challenges, there's a lot less content because it's not a guided experience. We simply provide the challenge, your mission, and the challenges you need to complete. And the validation checks will ensure that you have completed the challenge as expected. And just like we saw with regular validation for guided labs, once you complete the lab, your skill profile will be incremented or decremented based on your performance in the challenge. Now, because challenges don't provide guidance for how to complete the lab, you will get a major increase in your skill profile if you can complete the challenge, compared to a guided experience, which tells you how to do the lab. So here, again, as we saw with the guided lab, I didn't do anything in the actualizer portal, so all of the validation checks have failed. So I'll just leave it at that for now. If I had actually completed the challenges in the correct way, all of the checks would pass. But I'll submit knowing that I have those validation checks failing, and we'll see again a summary of our changes in the skill profile. So in this case, I did fail the challenge, so I have seen a decrement in my overall skill profile, as well as you can see a summary of how individual skills in your skill profile have been changed. Okay, and that's a quick tour of our guided labs and our lab challenges. Now I'd like to hand it back to Giacomo.
Thank you, Logan. That was really great. Now, let's go back for our other few minutes on the slides. And I want to talk more about enterprise, because when we built Cloud Academy, we had that in mind. So even our labs technology is being created to be enterprise ready. And with that, what I mean, that is secure. Everything is isolated for your enterprise infrastructure. There are no connection involved. So we create independent and dedicated environments for our labs technology. There are no hidden fees. That means that, of course, we won't send you a bill for what you created or use inside our environment. And of course, it's fully customizable. You can customize the content as well, the provisioning templates for the resources that we are going to create. That means they can shape our labs to be more similar to your products or environment or infrastructures. And specifically for customization, let me show you how you can customize a lab. We created a product that is called Content Engine. It can let you customize every piece of content that we have, like questions, exams, or training plan. And specifically, you can also customize our labs. And Content Engine lets administrator customize every step. You can write them from scratch, or you can edit starting from our catalog. As you can see, you can go over the steps, change without what you see, what you get editor, and make all the changes that you need to adapt the content to your content. As well, you can change and adapt the provisioning template. As you can see here, we are working with a Microsoft Azure Lab, so you can change the Azure Resource Manager template to adapt the change for your needs. The other feature that I love you to talk about is the Enterprise Bridge. That bridge enables students to set up a remote desktop, and it's going to run inside your browser, and that this will let students bypass network restriction if there are any, and that will let them connect directly to virtual instances using SSH or remote desktop connections. As you can see, it will be possible to open a new Windows tab and connect to a remote desktop through your browser, using your browser. Now, again, let me ask Logan to show you how this works and how can easily can be customizable.
Thanks, Giacomo. So it's really my pleasure today to present the Content Engine, which is where all of our content gets created. You can see the various types of content that we support in the Content Engine, but for this demonstration, we're focusing on hands-on labs. So I've signed in as a user inside of Acme Corp, and Acme Corp has developed 2 hands-on labs. I'm going to create one more today for this demo, and as you can see, we support creating customized labs in Content Engine for either AWS, Microsoft Azure, or GCP. Let's go with AWS. When you first create a lab, you can decide whether you want to create a lab from scratch using your own entirely fully custom content, or you can clone an existing lab, which allows you to use any of the labs in the Cloud Academy library as a starting point for your own lab, and you can make whatever modifications you need to customize it for your purposes. So let's say we want to make a lab based on Python programming. I'll select that lab, and we'll create a custom lab using that lab as a starting point. Let's give it a name, Acme's Coding with Python Strings. And I'll give a short description, which helps users understand in the library what the lab is about. I'll just say Acme Python programming for this demonstration. And here at the bottom, you see a summary of all the steps that are included in the lab. So these labs are taken from the cloning process, these lab steps. And these are the same lab steps that you would see if you took that Python programming lab. You can also drag and drop other lab steps, which are based on the lab steps in our library. And you can create new steps or edit the existing steps. So in this case, I'll make a very small change just to illustrate how you can customize content using Content Engine. So in this case, I've added Acme to the name of the EC2 instance, which is where students will perform their programming. And I'll save that as a new step, close that, and there we can see that we have customized that lab step. Now we can go through the step-by-step process by clicking Next. And this will allow us to categorize and add skills based on the objectives of the lab. So to make it easy to find, let's add it to our own Acme categories that we've created beforehand. And let's say that we're using this for our own internal certification program. Now by doing so, we'll be able to find this lab in the Cloud Academy library under the Acme internal certification category. And we'll see that later. If you're interested, you can also add custom skills or more skills to the lab here. Let's save that, and then we'll proceed to the provisioning template section. So this template was created by cloning the existing template from the Cloud Academy Python lab. So this is an AWS lab, so this is a CloudFormation template. If you used other cloud providers, you would see the cloud provider's native infrastructure as code solution template here. I'll avoid getting into too much technical detail, but this template will create an EC2 instance. And here we can again customize our template by going to Edit. And I'll make a slight change to the name that matches the content change that I made before by adding Acme to the start of the name of the EC2 instance. I'll save that. It succeeded, and now I'll publish the lab. And at this point, we're ready to use this lab as an end user. So here I'm back in the library, and if I go over to the category section, you'll see our internal certification category, which is where I added that custom lab to. Let's check it out. So here we are, and we can see the Acme Coding with Python Strings lab that we just created. Let's go ahead and start this lab. This is a great way for companies to create their own custom content for training their own users. So just like we saw before with Microsoft Azure, we're provided with credentials, this time for AWS. So let's go ahead and sign in to the AWS console using the Cloud Academy provided credentials. And I'll sign in. And as easy as that, we're in a real AWS console. Now let's look for that content change that we made, which was on the second step. And here we can see that, yes, indeed, our custom content is being used. We can see that we have Acme at the start of the name of the instance. And let's see if that same change is reflected in the actual AWS portal based on the change that we made to the provisioning template. And there we have it. Our EC2 instance beginning with Acme, just as we did in our provisioning template for this custom lab here on Cloud Academy, all thanks to the content engine. I'll hand it back to you, Giacomo.
Thank you, Logan. Thank you for the demo. Now, before we finish our webinar, let me go back for a second on our previous slide on the labs architecture. And I'd love to focus a little bit more on the skill assessment. Our labs technology can be used to build practical skills for thousands of people in your business. And you can start doing that, of course, with training, because you can assign laboratories using the learning path and training plan. And of course, you can train your current employees, but also you can use laboratories and in particular labs challenges as pre-assessment tool. That means that you can try to understand what's the assessment of a recent employed person in your team and understand since the beginning what are they a skill and what is able to. Well, of course, the first thing that it comes to mind when you read this thing is that you can also start a little bit before that, and then in our near future, it will be possible to use our hands-on labs and labs challenges as a recruiting tool, and so you can start assessing your new employees using our practical exam that we call hands-on labs. So that being said, thank you everybody for being today. Do you have any question, Francesca?
Yes, great job to both of you. We only have time for a couple of questions. So we have a question from Cindy. How does lab customization work with cloud vendors besides AWS?
I'll take that. So thanks for the question, Cindy. The experience for other cloud vendors is very similar to what we saw with AWS. Namely, only the provisioning template is changed. So for AWS, we saw a CloudFormation template, but if we were using Microsoft Azure, we would use its own native template, which is an Azure Resource Manager template. And similarly for GCP, we would use a Deployment Manager template. The rest of the content editing experience is the same in Content Engine.
Perfect. That's a great answer to a great question. Moving on to question number 2 from Gerald. Can I make labs that use organizations' actual cloud infrastructure?
Yes, absolutely. As we saw in the demo, really to use your own infrastructure, all you would need to do is create the provisioning template based on your own actual infrastructure. So if you're already using AWS, Azure, or GCP, it's very likely that you already have a template that you can use. You just insert that into the provisioning template section in Content Engine, and then you can create content using your own company's infrastructure.
Awesome. Thank you, Logan. So we only have time for one more question. This is an easy one from Mark. What is the best way to request a Cloud Academy demo?
Okay, I can take that. So the first thing that you can do, of course, is to go to our website, cloudacademy.com, and you can start a trial as an individual. From your dashboard, you're going to be able first to see the individual product, but also you can have a quick look of enterprise products with a self-serve demo. And if you need more help, you are more curious to see what also is available for enterprise customer, you then can contact our sales team, and they will be in touch with you very, very quickly.
Fantastic. Thank you to both Giacomo and Logan for being with us today, and thank you to all of you for taking some time out from your day to be with us. You will receive the recording of this webinar as soon as it is available. Also, if you sent us questions that we weren't able to address, we will answer them via email. Just a quick reminder that we'll head to Vegas to AWS reInvent. You can find us at booth 1206 in Vegas. And before we say goodbye, at the end of this session, you will see a quick survey pop up. We would really appreciate it if you could take 2 minutes to answer the questions and let us know your thoughts on this webinar. Thank you everyone again, and goodbye.
Thanks everyone.
Yeah, thanks to all our attendees. Thank you.